Hi, this is Joe Benito. It's September 2023. We're here at 1 Independence Court, which is 12th and 13th Street, looking over Hudson River. It's called Sinatra Drive. What you're going to see is my recollection of my memories of living and being in Hoboken, particularly when I was a little boy. Hoboken, to me, it formed who I was, who I am. I always say that you can never take Hoboken out of me. I think of Hoboken as a sacred place. It's sacred because of the memories. It's sacred because it's the first place that I remember people really loving me. It's sacred because there's many churches here, but more importantly, it's sacred because I have memories that have made me who I am. Now that we're leaving the East Coast and going to the West Coast, I want to share some of those memories with you, and you get to experience some snippets of my life here in Hoboken, particularly from age 0 to age 8. So get the popcorn, watch it, and we'll see you later on. So we're standing here, it's called the Shipyard. And, you know, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they literally built ships. Ships were either ships that were for the war or passenger ships. Also, there's a picture of Frank Sinatra. I think Frank is the most famous former citizen of Hoboken. And there's this picture of him probably when he was, I don't know, 25 when he first started out. He lived on 4th and Monroe. And the interesting thing about the intersection between his family and mine is that his mother, Dolly Sinatra, who was political and well-known, and my great aunts were friendly. Well, friendly is maybe too strong for a word, but at least the myth that passed out of my family is that we knew them. And Dolly had an interesting reputation that you could read about in some stories. Right? So this is the home of Frank Sinatra. It's also the home of Joe Benito and other Benitos and Spinellas and Marquettas too. These are called the Yellow Houses, Yellow Apartments, 13th and Washington. When I was in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, I went to Academy of the Sacred Heart, and there were only 3 boys in the class. One of the boys was a young boy named, Arturo Tajera, and we called him Tootie for short. I never knew what Tootie was until I was older, and I used to send him postcards from Wildwood when we used to travel. I used to say Tootie, T-U-R-I, and he was Cuban. He and his family came over during the 60s, and his family owned a laundromat at 4th and 5th of Washington. I remember going there. But Tootie was about my size, he was a little chunky, but the thing I remember most about Tootie is I never had Spanish food or Cuban food. His mother used to make empanadas, I think they're called, and I used to eat them, and they were really tasty. But I only knew Italian food. It was my first experience with Cuban food. Tootie was well loved. I lost track of him. Eventually went to St. Peter's High School. I went looking for him once on Facebook because I found our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade picture. I was going to try to send it to him. So, Tootie, this is a shout out to you. This is a quick stop at this corner, which is 12th and Bloomfield. We were good friends with the Grotto family. The 2 daughters were Maria Grotto, Josephine Grotto, and her father and mother, I don't remember, I think it was Joseph, maybe Josephine, and we were good friends with them. And they're played mostly with my sister Ann. But one of the things about Maria Grotto is that she was like 3 or 4 years older than me. She had this dark hair and dark eyes, and I was like my first crush. I remember my parents took us to Sound of Music in the city, and I got to sit next to her, and that was like the biggest thing. I must have been no more than 6 years old. It just so happens 30 years later, I'm talking to Jerry Costa, who's a good friend from TDEC. We're sitting and we're talking about friends in Hoboken. He tells me he was once engaged to Josephine Grotto. I said, no, really? So I didn't have that thought of it for a long time until Jerry and I talked about that. So this is the Grotto family. I have fond memories of them as a family, as a kid. So, okay, we're here at 12th and Bloomfield. This is basically kind of my neighborhood. There's Bloomfield and then Garden, and my house is up here. So I used to play on these streets. I didn't have a bicycle then, so I was doing a lot of walking. And I remember running back and forth this particular street, and I was don't know why I was climbing, but I was climbing at this fence. And if you notice that these things, these spos are pretty close apart, literally my ankles got stuck between them and my head filled over. And I remember some guy, I think it was a guy, who stopped and picked me up. I don't think I felt stupid. I was just glad to be out of the fence. The thing you'll notice about Hoboken is that it has really, really, really wonderful iron works. And a lot of it's still original from what I remember. And this seems like it's, because it's really hard to replace these. So I think it's the original. So that's one of my, not my fondest memories, but my memories that has stayed with me for all those years. All right, so we're here at 1143 Garden Street. It is, I only really lived in 2 homes in Hoboken, 527 Park Inn, 1143 Garden Street. The great thing about 1143 Garden Street, that's where all my memories of living in Hoboken were. So a few things to point out. First of all, my grandparents lived on the 1st floor. We lived on the 2nd floor. The Lewis sisters lived on the 3rd floor, and Aunt Mary and Uncle Allie lived, and their 2 children lived on the top floor. And I remember as a little boy, I would just go back and forth all the time. And the other thing about 1143 Garden Street is that my grandfather had a fig tree in the backyard. And he had that fig tree transplanted from his house on 1037 Park Avenue to his house here. And that fig tree stayed here until 1965. My grandmother sold the house because my grandfather got cancer, and it was only sold for $50,000. They took the money from those proceeds to pay for my grandfather's cancer operations at Sloan Kettering. But that fig tree stayed with us, and we took that fig tree and transplanted it to my parents' house in 2008. And then when my parents moved in 1965. Then my parents moved in 2008. Then we took it to our house in Teaneck. The other thing about this house is that my father, my grandfather made wine, literally wine. He used to buy these crates of grape and used to put it in this basement, and we used to turn the wine thing, big bottle, and he used to store it there. And I remember as a little boy, he asked me to take the wine out of the cask and put it in a bottle, and you had to take this rubber looked like a straw, suck it. And I remember sucking it so much that my mouth got all wine in it. And I don't think I tasted wine for a really long time. But the other thing, being Italian and growing up in Hoboken, is that we drank wine all the time. We used to drink it in these little, they look like shot glasses, and my parents used to pour a little 7-Up. And I lived, so I was really close, my grandparents, particularly my grandmother, and I spent a lot of time with them. The other thing you'll notice about Hoboken is these great stoops. And think about stoops, in addition to sitting on them, which I always really like sitting on them and kind of watching things go by. But the other thing about stoops is you play stoop ball. Now, for those of us who grew up, maybe those of you who grew up in the suburbs, you don't know what stoop ball is. So you take a Spalding and you hit it against the stoop, and if it hits the corner and you catch it, it's 2 points. If it bounces once, it's 1 point. And if you don't catch it all, it's 0 points. So stoop ball was something else we did as a kid. 1143 Garden Street, great memories. I love this place. And it's the first time I lived in an apartment. Let me tell you something about the apartment. So it was like, they called it like a railroad. It was 3 bedrooms, and it actually had a dumb elevator, which, and it was in operation. And I had my own room that overlooked our small garden. I lived off the kitchen, and the bathroom was this old black and white tile. And to this day, when I go into old bathrooms, particularly here in Hoboken, old restaurants, they still have that black and white tile, and it brings back those memories for me too. So 1143 Garden Street is really where I consider home. And I don't miss it because I'm back, but it's always great to visit again. So one of my boyfriends was a little young boy called Johnny Boy Pantaleone, and he used to live in this house, and we used to play all together. He was then he was smaller than me, but he was a tough kid. Actually, our first fight was in front of my house, and I remember not putting up my dukes, and he hit me, and he hit me in the nose, and hurt my nose. And a big kid, I forget his last name, but I eventually got to know him later on, said, "You know, Joe, when you fight, you got to put up your hands." So that was my first fight with Johnny Pantoliano, who was also my best friend. And he had a sister named Madeline, who was also friends with my sister Ann. I wonder where he is now. Actually, about 6 months ago, I was in front of my old house, 1143 Garden Street, and I met the woman who actually owns the house, who literally bought the house from my parent. Her family bought the house in 1965. And I asked about Johnny, and she says he thinks he lives someplace downtown. So this is a shout out to my friend Johnny Pantoliano. So everyone knows Hoboken is the birthplace of Frank Sinatra. What people don't realize, Hoboken is also the birthplace of baseball in 1846. So this sign commemorates that. It was played at Elysian Fields. So that's either the myth, the folklore, or actually it happened. And not many people know that. So Doubleday, 1846, Hoboken. We're here at 11th and Garden. 11th Street is probably one of the widest kind of streets that goes east and west in Hoboken. It's only a block from where I grew up. But one of the things about this area that I remember is I see these trees that are here all the way down. I remember as a little boy, so it's the early 60s, they were just first planted. Either I was here when they planted it or soon after. I remember them being little narrow trees. And every time I come back to Hoboken, every time I walk by here, I remember those days, and now they're big, big trees. So we're standing in front of Aunt Mary and Uncle Allie's house. They had two children, my cousin Anne Marie and my cousin Thomas, or Timmy, as he used to call him. I never know why they called him Timmy. They call him Timmy. So Timmy moved to Morristown with his many, many years ago. Aunt Mary died when she was about 100 years old, and she was the oldest living person in Hoboken. So when she turned 100, they had a float for her down Washington Street. And I have very fond memories of, as I said earlier, 1143 Garden Street, going up and having coffee with Aunt Mary and Uncle Allie, and I always felt really welcomed by them. And so this is where they lived after they moved from our house, 1143 Garden Street. And my parents were really close with them. And we used to spend, when I was a young adult, I used to spend New Year's Eve with them too. So they're really special to me and my girls. Also, when my girls had to do a school project, they had to interview someone who was an immigrant. So they interviewed Aunt Mary, and they heard the stories of her coming over as a 5-year-old child.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Italy, town of Pat di Messina, the province of Messina.
How did you feel about coming over to America?
I didn't want to come here because I was afraid of the big boat that we had to go on. And I cried myself sick.
And even at 90, so 93, she told these vivid memories of what it's like being on the boat when she got here. She was a seamstress like my grandmother. So, and she was sharp as a tack, and she cooked and she cleaned well into her 90s.
Do you have any stories about the happiest day of your life?
We family gather every weekend, every Sunday. The family got together and we enjoyed life with all the family, with the entire family, brothers, sisters, and friends.
In Italy?
Yeah, they were here on Sunday, every Sunday.
So we have very fond memories of Aunt Mary. And I was talking to Kara about it, and Kara said to Max, yeah, Aunt Mary was like this big. She really wasn't. She was probably at 4 feet 5 by the time she passed away. So that's Aunt Mary and Uncle Allie and my cousins Anne Marie and Timmy. 1125 Park Avenue. So we're standing in front of 1037 Park Avenue. So my grandparents, before they moved to 1143 and Garden Street, owned this piece of property. Actually, my grandfather owned a variety of properties in Hoboken and bought and sold them. But the thing I remember most about this house is that it had an amazing dining room that used to sit 14, 15, 16, 17 people. I was a little young because when I was in this house, I didn't live here. Visiting here, I was probably somewhere between 0 and 4 or 5. But I remember my mother telling me these great stories about her grandmother cooking in this house, about her brothers living in this house, how Uncle Charlie and my uncle and my grandfather used to make, veal cutlets and chicken cutlets, and all the great parties they had. Even when my mother was in her 80s and 90s, and we talked about 1037 Park Avenue. She used to really brighten up, even when she had a little bit of dementia, about living here and all the parties, and about my grandmother. And I remember as a little kid, I came here, and I was kind of rambunctious little boy, and I remember my grandfather chased me around the dining room table, and my grandmother yelling at him in Italian to stop. Frank, his name was Frank Spinella, to stop. So, but I didn't know this as well as I know my other houses. But in the myth of our family, stories of our family, 1037 Park Avenue is kind of an important place in our family. So we're standing in front of Thaler's funeral home. I know it sounds morbid to stand in front of a funeral home, but being Italian Catholic, we always went to funeral homes, and this was the funeral home of choice by many of my family members, including my grandparents. So 1965, my grandfather died. 1969, my grandmother passed away, and that time it was 3 consecutive days. So I can't not go into a funeral home and smell flowers and not bring me back to those days when it either was 11 or 7. We got to know Jack, who was the guy who owned it, pretty well. And we had many funerals here since then. So we are standing in front of 527 Park Avenue, which is between 6th and 5th Park Avenue here. This is actually the first house I lived in. However, I was born here. Actually, I was born in Greenville Hospital in Jersey City, but this is my first little home. Probably lived here from age 0 to probably 2. Maybe 1960 we moved out of this house. So I don't really remember it, but it is my first address. And my parents always talked about living at 527 Park Avenue. Again, another property that my grandfather owned, and another property that my parents lived in before we moved to 1143, probably in 1960, 1961. So my first house. So we're standing at Church Towers. I had 3 friends, where there was 3 boys at Academy Sacred Art. Myself, Arturo Tajera, and Larry Fiducci. And this is where Larry Fiducci lived. It was Church Towers. And I didn't realize it then, but Church Towers basically moderate priced housing for people, mostly people who were teachers. And I remember Larry didn't have a dad. Sometimes we used to get in trouble together. So he lived here. We used to play out front at Church Towers. Actually, my uncle, who was a teacher at Hoboken High School, he also lived here too, many years later. And there's 5 or 6 of these buildings still here. And so this has been here at least 50 or 60 years. So Church Towers, home of Larry Fiducci. So we're standing in front of Hoboken Public Library. We're at 5th and Park Avenue. When I was a little boy, I lived on 1143 Garden Street, and I used to bring my book bag here, and I used to come and I used to study in the Hoboken Public Library. And when I moved back to Hoboken a year and a half ago, I think other than going to church, I think this was my second stop. I walked in, and I remember going up these really big wooden stairs up to the 2nd floor. I used to take my book bag out, and I used to study. And I remember doing kind of my math problems here in the library. And I think it was my refuge. And it was a place to go that was safe. And I must have been in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, and no one would let the kids roam the streets, but we did in Hoboken. So fond memories of Hoboken Public Library. I missed it, and when I first came back, it was the first place I came. So we're standing at A Lady of Grace Church in Hoboken. It is a really large church. It's almost the size of a small cathedral. There's probably one of the largest churches in Hudson County or in northern New Jersey before they built probably the cathedral in Newark. We as a family used to come here every Sunday for church. At least that's what I remember. One story that my mother always told, I must have been 3 and a half, 4 the most. And at that time, you had to go to the rail to have Holy Communion. So my mother went and I scampered really quick. I had these like blue black shorts on, and I said to my mother, "Mommy, I want to eat with you." And she says, "Joey, Annie's by herself. Shh, go back and be with Annie." I said, "Okay, Mommy." And I, hustled back. And the way my mother retells the story, that the woman next to her said, "Wow, you were thinking pretty quickly." So Lady Grace Church is one of my fondest memories around going here. And I remember pre-Vatican II, for those of you who are Catholic, the priest had always had the back to the altar, and this had an altar that was like huge, like 30, 40, 50 feet high. And I remember as a little boy saying, "Jesus, how are they to turn the altar around?" I could never quite, this is somewhere before 5, 6, 7 years old. I know how they would turn the altar around. And then after Vatican II, they had a little table out front, which was the altar. I said, "Oh, that's how they solved that problem." So that's my two kind of memories of a Lady Grace Church. Renee and I went back here about 6 months ago for Pride Mass, and the pastor here gave a great sermon about diversity, about respect, about being there for others, particularly those who are LGBTQ plus community. So I was glad to know that Lady Grace is on the forefront of some progressive issues too. So Lady Grace Church, 4th and Willow. So we're standing at Hoboken Hospital, University Hospital. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was known as St. Mary's Hospital. So it was a private Catholic-run hospital. And the thing about this place, memory for me, is from 1965 to 1969, when my grandmother lived on her own, I used to take the bus down from North Bergen, actually the 21, now it's the 22. And one of the things that we used to do on Sundays is I used to go to Mass with my grandmother in the chapel at St. Mary's. I doubt if that chapel's still here. But, and I remember walking from 7th and Washington to here. And to this day, when I go to particularly Catholic hospitals, I always seek out the chapel. Some of it is usually a place of solace to pray, but also brings back the memories of my grandmother. Actually, we called her Nana. So we're standing in front of St. Francis Church, which is 3rd and Jefferson. St. Francis was the home church for my mother. She was christened here, or baptized, I should say. She married my dad here in 1954. When I was a little boy, I was actually baptized here in March of 1958. When my parents were 25 years married, 50 years married, the services were here. There was a pastor called Father Mike Guglielmi, who we knew for many years, a wonderful Franciscan. So, and it's a small church, it's really not that big, but it's really a peaceful, prayerful place. When you walk in there, you could feel peace. Hoboken has a lot of churches, and this is one of the Italian churches, one of the predominantly Italian churches. There's other churches too, but St. Francis, served by the Franciscans. So I'm standing in front of 220 Adams Street, which is basically between 2nd and 3rd and Adams Street. It's the Hoboken Senior Citizen Housing. My Uncle Charlie and my Aunt Dolly, so that's my great uncle, my great aunt lived here. He was Big Uncle Charlie because my uncle, who was my mother's brother, was Little Uncle Charlie. Now, in reality, they were both small men. Thing about my Big Uncle Charlie is that he used to fight. He used to be a fighter called Joe Dundee, and he fought in the 30s or 40s, and he must have been no more than 5'1", but he was really compact. He was always pugnacious. Every time he saw you, he threw a punch at you. And unfortunately, my Big Uncle Charlie, Little Uncle Charlie, I think had a love-hate relationship. And once they had a little too much to drink, they would yell at each other. And one year we went to visit them, and they actually got into a shoving match, and they actually got into a fist fight. And I remember my dad, who's 6'2", 200 pounds, getting in between my Uncle Charlie, Little Uncle Charlie, who was like 5'5", and my other Uncle Charlie, and my Big Uncle Charlie going like this and hitting, unfortunately, Little Uncle Charlie. And I remember he broke his lip and there was like blood running down. So I must have not been more than, I don't know, 7, 8, or 9. But they all made up and they were friendly, but Italians were passionate. You know, sometimes passionate in the negative sort of way. So that's my big Uncle Charlie, little Uncle Charlie, big Uncle Charlie, little Uncle Charlie, and Aunt Dolly remembrance. 220 Adams Street. So I'm standing here in front of Leo's Restaurant. Leo's Restaurant was founded in 1939. How it's important in my family history is that Leo was owned, original owners were Leo and Tessa DiTerlizzi. My Uncle Joe, who is my mother's brother, my godfather, married a woman named Kathleen Caputo. Kathleen's mother and Aunt Tessie were sisters. So many years we came either down to the restaurant to eat, and this restaurant is one of the most popular restaurants still in Hoboken, owned by the grandson Nicky DePalma and the sister. But the other thing, Grace. The other thing about coming here in Hoboken is that they're Barese, or from a town called Bari in Italy. So the night before or Christmas Eve, they used to come down and have 7 fishes. They used to shuck oysters and make focaccia bread. So we didn't come here a lot, but I have very fond memories of Aunt Tessie and Uncle Leo. They weren't really my aunts and uncles, but in Italian families, if they're older than you and they're related somewhere, somehow, you call them aunt and uncle. So that's my Leo restaurant story. I'm standing in front of St. Peter and Paul Church on Hudson Street, and I didn't go here as a boy because we went to Lady Grace Church. But the thing that's noteworthy is since we moved back to Hoboken, we've been walking down Hudson Street from 12th and going here. The thing that's really noteworthy about our experience here, first of all, it's really a welcoming church. Second, the music is terrific. It's small, there's a lot of young families, but probably the reason that's the most makes it interesting, unique, and actually terrific is that the current pastor is a fellow named Reverend Mike Andriano, who the fact is that him and myself and Renee and others, we all went to the same high school together. He was a high school classmate. He actually sat in my homeroom every year for 4 years. And I knew he was a priest for the Archdiocese, so I would see him at bishop events, but we never really got introduced many years later. And now that we go here, Mike used every opportunity to introduce us. One time he's walking down the aisle and he's blessing the congregation. He turns to us and he blesses Renee and I, and he says, I'm giving them an extra blessing because they were my classmates in high school. And then when we meet him after church, he introduces us. Again, he introduced us as as his classmates. I also secretly think he had a crush on Renee. He never told me that, but that's my sense too. So that's our experience here, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place, and Father Mike's a great pastor. Walking down Court Street, and it's one of those serendipitous streets in Hoboken. When I was a little boy, I never really noticed Court Street, and as you could tell, as you tell us, we're walking, there are cobblestones and there are houses, and there used to be a restaurant or two here. It's really a sweet looking street, and it makes Hoboken feel like downtown New York. You know, small streets downtown New York. Feels like a throwback to the 19th century, late 18th, 19th century in Hoboken. So we're sitting at 7th and Washington. It's now the Shade store. But when I was a little boy, it was the first Blimpie-based store ever. Right here in Hoboken. And the Blimpies were that big. The reason why I know this is that I used to go to school across the street, and at lunchtime or periodically we used to get subs here. To this day, and when I get a Blimpie, I don't get many Blimpies. It's those oil and the vinegar and that lettuce that's all chopped up it brings back my memories when I was a little boy. First blinker base here in Washington Street in Hoboken. So I'm sitting on the steps of Hoboken Charter School, but when I was a little boy, it was called the Academy of the Sacred Heart. It was a grammar school and a high school, and I went here first grade, second grade, and third grade. They had no kindergarten, and I started school when I was 5, going on 6. And the reason why I started then is because my mother said to our teacher, the first grade teacher, Mrs. Valentino, because my sister went here, she goes, "Please take Joey, and if he doesn't do well, we'll take him back," because I was so, I didn't misbehave, I just had a lot of energy. I did fine, so I stayed in first grade, second grade, third grade. It was, believe it or not, it was mixed ages, so it was first and second, second and third, third and fourth. And there was, again, only 3 boys in my class, Arturo Tajera, Larry Verducci, and myself, and then eventually they had a high school. They also, there was in the back, they had a garden, and that's where Mother Mary was. And I remember distinctly when they had the May crowning. Second thing is I made my first Holy Communion here in a small chapel, all white, all white suits, and once in a while my buddies and I, we used to sneak back into the building. I don't think I ever told this story, on the back of the building, and I remember going into my old classroom and getting the teacher's grade book and actually looking up my grades and looking up comments they made. Today we would literally get thrown out of school for that, but in the third grade we didn't. And then eventually it closed to either closed to boys or they closed the grammar school and they only made it a high school, and it just coincided with us moving from here in 1965 to North Bergen. So I finished third grade here, and then fourth grade I went to another school in North Bergen. I actually went to 4 different grammar schools in 8 years. So Holy Academy of Sacred Heart, fond memories on 7th and Washington. So I'm standing in front of 732 Washington Street. After my grandfather died in 1965, we moved to North Bergen. My grandmother moved here to this house. It was one of the properties my grandfather owned. It used to be a candy store here, and there was 2 apartments, nothing in the basement. And I used to come every weekend on the 21 bus to North Bergen and come visit her. Really small apartment, it was really narrow, and I used to sleep either on the couch or when my uncle, he was a security guard, night guard, I would sleep in his bed. And I remember watching Perry Mason with my grandmother, because my Uncle Joe was starting to be a lawyer and she loved Perry Mason. I think that was her way of connecting with my uncle who was a lawyer. And I spent actually summers here too. It used to be hot in the summer, and I used to play this game called Bottle Cap. And what that was is that I would, here on there's a sidewalk, has 4 blocks, and what you would do is you would put, certain little boxes with numbers in it, and you would take literally bottle caps and you would sit it down, and the way you weighted it down is you used to melt crayons in it and play this game. So I always have fond memories of playing that, as well as box ball, right, too. So, and then when I was a kid, I used to go play baseball in the park here on Hudson Street, or park, lower down. So fond memory, 732 Washington Street. Also, my grandmother used to, the far right window, where there's the air conditioner now, she used to sit there and watch buses go by. And I remember her doing that too. So we're standing in what they call now H Street Tavern. When I was a young boy, my grandmother lived across the street. And once in a while, my uncle used to babysit us, and he also drank. So he used to take us to this. I used to take me to this tavern. He used to say to the bartender, "Give the kid a Coke or a Pepsi," and I would drink it. I used to play shuffleboard here too. The other thing about this saloon, back then it's called saloon, not a bar, was that my grandmother played the numbers. So she used to write the numbers she wanted to play. She used to give it to me in either piece of paper. I would hand it to the bookie at the bar and give him the $2 so she played the numbers. And back then, there wasn't lottery, there was just the numbers. And we used to listen for the numbers when they came out. I think it was Saturday night at 5 o'clock. It was the attendance, and we used to listen to the radio. So 2 stories here, numbers and drinking with my Uncle Charlie. So I'm here at Stevens Institute of Technology. As you can tell, it's been here since the 19th century. When I was a little boy, there was not this parking lot. There was not the football field. It was just rolling hills. And I used to take my sleigh, and I used to sleigh down these rolling hills as a little boy. And so probably 2 or 3 blocks from here. But I have fond memories of that. That's when we used to get snow in the 1960s. We don't get snow anymore. So and then I used to play on Castle Point Terrace. The Castle Point Terrace is where, quote unquote, the rich people lived. So that's my memories of Stevens Institute of Technology. So I am standing on Castle Point Terrace and probably 10th Street. And this was the home of the Cricco family, Dr. Joseph Cricco. And Dr. Cricco had like 7 kids or 8 kids. And I was in 3rd grade with Mary Cricco, and my sister was in high school or grammar school with Joseph Cricco. So I used to come here periodically to play as a kid, and I remember the Cricco family, and it was probably one of the largest houses I've ever seen when I was a little boy. Castle Point Terrace is usually the really rich people lived in Hoboken. So the Cricco family house in Hoboken, New Jersey. So the other bar that was nearby that my uncle would take me to is the Alicia Cafe. And again, he would sit me on the bar, give me a Pepsi, give me a Coke. And I remember one story, the bartender turns to me and says, your uncle's really a good guy, do you know that? And that stayed with me for a long time, because when you're a young boy, you don't think of your relatives as people. But my uncle actually was a sweet guy, and he took good care of us in his way. Alicia Cafe. So we're in Maxwell Park. 2 things about Maxwell Park. First of all, across the street here was Maxwell Coffee Manufacturing Company, and it was here, as long as I can remember. They eventually sold it and it became a development. But on rainy days, you actually could smell coffee throughout the whole town. That's when you knew it was going to rain, because the atmospheric pressure was up and you could smell coffee. I used to come play in this park when I was a little boy. When I still lived in Hoboken, there was swings and there was seesaws and there was monkey bars. But then when I got to be older, even though I lived in North Bergen, I would come down here and play on these basketball courts, and I would do pickup games with kids when I was 13, 14, and 15. I used to take the bus down, or when I got to be 16, I had a bike and I used to bike down. So, and I used to try to go to every basketball court to play when I used to play a lot. So Maxwell House Park, a great place to be. So after living in Teaneck for 35 years, we decided to sell a house last year in 2022. And as we were looking at different places to live, I said to Renee, it really would mean a lot to me if we moved back to Hoboken. And she agreed. Her only stipulation is that we live near the water and she has a water view, which we have. And it's really magical. I remember walking down Washington Street one of the first times, and I said to her, is this heaven? Have I died and I'm dreaming? And I'm actually in Hoboken. And it's really a great year. It's been a magical year to walk the same streets I walked in as a kid, to go to the Hoboken Library again, to walk to church at St. Peter and Paul, to walk to physical therapy, to dry cleaners, and to visit new places, and as well as places I've been there before. So it's been, as I said, a great year, a magical year, and I am grateful for Renee for having given me the opportunity to do this, and we'll be leaving here soon. So Thank you.